What's up guys, it's Emilio here from the ACT team, and I'm here to talk to you about the second part in the two-part series on how to stop having too many meetings. Check it out. Now, if you haven't seen the first part, I highly recommend to check it out. It lays over the groundwork on why conducting too many meetings can be extremely hurtful for your team. It also goes over a couple red flags to help you know whether or not a meeting should happen. If you want to see that video, click the little icon at the top right hand corner of the video and it'll lead you straight to it. Alright, so without further ado, let's dive into establishing some ground rules for meetings. Really quickly, what are these ground rules for? These ground rules are meant for those meetings that are absolutely necessary. Now, if these meetings are going to happen, it's important to have some ground rules in order to be sure that these meetings stay productive. So let's get into the first ground rule. So number one is get a feeling for how meetings are perceived. So we don't have a crystal ball to look into everyone's minds and get an understanding of what they think about meetings, but it's safe to assume that most, if not all of your team is going to think that you might be having too many meetings. And so you can use tools like Tiny Pulse to help run surveys inside of your team to get a sense of what your team thinks about meetings. Another way to get a sense of how your team is feeling about meetings is to do a post-meeting feedback session. Getting feedback like this helps you get an idea of which meetings to scrap based on how your team is actually feeling. So example questions you could ask are, was this meeting helpful at all? And the second question is, how could this meeting have been improved? Combine the data that you collect from your surveys and the data you get from your post feedback sessions and make a decision. Throw away the meetings that don't seem to be productive at all based on the sentiment of your team. Ground rule number two is to define the purpose of meetings throughout your organization. Much like how you would put a lot of effort behind your mission statement, your values, etc. in your organization, you should put the same amount of effort behind the reasons why you would have meetings in the first place. This can establish some precedents behind the reasons why you'd have meetings and therefore save you in time, productivity, focus, etc. You can ask questions like, can this meeting be done asynchronously? Or who decides who gets invited? Who does the inviting? Where do these meetings get held? You'll find these questions and many more in the deep dive on how to stop too many meetings in the first link below in the description. In all, taking the time to answer these questions can help you define a clear purpose for meetings inside of your organization. Third rule is to use technology to enable productive meetings. With so many tools out there specifically built towards productivity, it's worth it taking the time to decide which tools will be best suited for your team. For example, you can hold on to the human element of meetings and use voice and sometimes video messaging inside of Yak to asynchronously communicate with your team. You can also use documentation tools to chronicle your workflow like Notion or Coda. We actually go over this in another video where we covered what asynchronous communication actually is. You can check that out in the second link below in the description. When you boil meaningful synchronous meetings down to its core, it's about getting consensus, getting everyone on the same page, and nurturing relationships. But it doesn't mean that everyone needs to be involved in every single meeting that goes on. See, meetings can take 30, maybe even 60 minutes at a time. So taking 10 minutes to strategically decide on who absolutely needs to be involved in whatever meeting that's going to go on can save countless hours across your team. If you need something more tangible to decide how much of a cost meetings can be to your teammates, Harvard Business Review actually created a free meeting calculator tool. It's as easy as inputting the meeting time, the number of attendees, and it will calculate the cost of that specific meeting, not just time, but also financially. This can show you not only where you can save time for your teammates, but also where you can save for your business. The fifth ground rule for meetings is to strive for decision making and outcomes for each meeting. Try to stay away from meetings that are just purely updates. If the meeting isn't about relationship building, or if there's not a decision to be made, perhaps the meeting doesn't actually have to happen. Teammates should leave every meeting with an action item, either received or delivered, at the end of every meeting. So be sure that there's a system in place so that happens within your meetings. The simplest way to do this is to create an action item list or a highlight list, for example, inside of a Google Doc. And so that way, even after the meeting is done, you can share these highlights to the people that weren't involved in the meeting. But remember that the information you want to share has to be relevant to the person you're sending it to. The whole point of them not being in the meeting in the first place is so that they didn't have to waste their time. So you don't need to send them a document of highlights if it still doesn't serve them in the first place. Last but not least, the final ground rule for meetings is to move all other types of communication to asynchronous. Once you've identified the purposeful meetings inside of your organization, it's time to move all other types of communication to asynchronous communication. If you Slack, text, or email, you've worked asynchronously. You've communicated asynchronously. In other words, you've gone through projects, you've gone through problems, and you found solutions without all the stakeholders having to be there at the same time. For the meetings that you're going to have, you can share the synchronous meeting agenda ahead of time so that the attendees can focus and prioritize the work that's going to be discussed in advance. You can also have teammates that are attending yak their questions in advance prior to the meeting, so that way they'll be for sure addressed during the meeting. You can also set some time parameters for asynchronous communication in case you need a middle ground. For example, you can time box the not quite urgent but not quite needing material pings with, can you check on this before X? There's just so many use cases for asynchronous communication, and there's so many benefits that come along with it, but of course there might be some adjustment times for teams that have just always done things some certain way. And this is why understanding your organization's purpose behind these meetings can help you understand how and why you have meetings in the first place, so you can find ways that asynchronous communication can fill in the cracks and level up your team's productivity that much more. But don't just take our word for it. Here's a quick couple facts that we found from teams that have used Yak for quite some time and how they've helped become more productive and stay efficient. Just look at those stats. Alright, so we finally have established some ground rules for meetings. And if you watched both parts of this entire series on how to stop having too many meetings, we would understand exactly from how bad meetings can actually hurt your team's productivity, and when to spot when meetings are just completely wasteful in the first place. And now that you've established some ground rules, you can finally find the purpose behind the meetings that are absolutely necessary in your team and use asynchronous communication to fill in those gaps and stay productive and efficient throughout the work week. Like I said, if you snuck past the first part of this video series, I really recommend you watch the first one. You can click it in the first link in the description below. But other than that, if you like this video and you want to see more from us, consider subscribing and click the notification bell so that you get notified when the next video just like this one comes out. Other than that, I'll see you guys next time.